Thank you, Jose. Good morning, everyone. It's always wonderful to be back here at the ICT Forum. Jose does this religiously every year. I also have the opportunity to speak at the India Advantage Summit. Jose, you're doing a great job bringing everyone together. Fantastic opportunity to learn and exchange ideas, some fascinating ideas that I've picked up from these forums in the past year. So when, of course, Jose wanted me to come and speak about some of the ideas we're working on, and especially on the topic, it kind of makes me nervous to be standing here and talking about ICT and sustainability, especially when you're going through this whole upheaval. So what is ICT anymore? I mean, things like significantly changing over a period of time, and also talking about sustainability. So kind of made me nervous and see what is it exactly I can share. Maybe there's some bit of learnings from India that I thought some of the audience would be already familiar, but how do we start using that way of thinking to imagine solving for aspects of sustainability? I thought I could spend some time on that. And also share some of the experience specifically in the area of green energy transition. Especially I think we are focusing on unified energy interface as an open network, and I'll talk about that in a bit. But in the interest of time, I'm probably not going to cover everything that I thought I can cover today, but I think what would be useful is to understand the kind of times we are living in. I mean, it's very exciting times. We are clearly in the best of times and the worst of times. That makes it even more exciting. Of course, the worst of times because I think clearly we are running out of time on a very complex problem of sustainability, climate change. We have a lot of exponential effort that needs to be done in very little time to keep the earth less warmer, keep the temperature under 2 degrees from the industrial age in terms of increase. And it's, I think the way I look at it, it's a very, very complex, unprecedented problem. Perhaps the civilization has not faced, because it's not just complex in terms of scale and magnitude at which the response it warrants, but also the time window that we have. It's kind of like a ticking time bomb, and we have very little time to address this collectively at a civilization population scale, and I don't think we have all the time to think through. But it's also the exciting time because it's also the best of times, because if at all there can be anything that can be done, probably we are at the best stage of our evolution as a civilization to respond to it, and we are in the middle of this big tech upheaval. So this being the problem on one side, which requires every country, every organization, as an individual, to rise up to this occasion. We are also in the middle of major transformation. And I think my focus today is to see, is there a role digital can play in solving some of these complex problems? Is there a way, at least we can accelerate the problem solving? And this quote from Windsurf, pretty much last month, when we were last year, when we completed 50 years of internet, it's kind of very profound. To say that, we are still figuring out how to exploit the value of internet, the internet offers, and there is still 99% left to go. And while that is happening, on the other side, we have serious genius minds compressing the internet into one large generative AI model to solve for the abundance of reasoning and intelligence that I think the world can put together, could use in the form of artificial intelligence. I mean, today, I can pretty much 2 files is what it takes to compress the internet and derive very human-like reasoning coming out of it. And that's pretty much the times we are living in. And this is what, and future, we're thinking that programming as a language can change. Natural languages like English is good enough to build a programmable interface of any kind. The underlying infrastructure is kind of act like a very intelligent operating system, an AI operating system, that's going to reimagine how we think about digital. So we have the planet crisis on one side, and the other side, there's this third epoch, as Andreessen Horowitz calls it, that we are at a very excellent time where we have a way to harness technology and reduce the marginal cost of effort in solving some of these complex problems. So we have this yin and yang of an opportunity and a problem. Right now, the question is there something that we can do with this? Well, this gives us some sort of the tools and the ability and sort of the technologies. I think probably where we think where we are lacking is a method to bring them all together. And that's where I've been reflecting and thinking, is there any learnings from the India's method of adopting digital at population scale that can bring some aspects of combining together to solve for complex crises as climate action and use technology to accelerate and collectively make all the efforts. And that's where I thought I could spend some time talking about what could that model look like and how are we trying to bring that model into action, especially particularly in the case of energy that I'll talk about. Of course, beyond energy, the larger part of sustainability is where there's a lot of work, but I thought I'd spend some time on the energy side. Now, essentially, what is that India model for those who probably are not familiar? And all this happened, I know they are big numbers. We can all say that, okay, India always had big numbers. But let me tell you the numbers, how small those numbers were in 2009. Back in 2009, India's banking penetration, and this is when all of us, iPhone was already out, App Store was already out. India's banking penetration was less than 20%. So while India has big numbers, it's not easy to achieve those numbers. So from 17% banking penetration, India jumped to 85% banking penetration in 9 years. And that's unprecedented, right? Because I don't think any other economy has managed that jump in 9 years. It would have taken about 5 decades, India did this in 9 years. How did India make that jump? And there's not just one jump. There are a series of jumps, as you can see. It all happened with this thinking of this model of digital public infrastructure. India took a saying that India cannot be an economy that depends on one solution or one solution provider to formalize India's economy, the population, and bring them into formal economy and bring them into online economy and make them thrive. And then people said, no, we're not going to build solutions like how Silicon Valley or others build platforms. We said we're going to build digital infrastructure. Just like how we need physical infrastructure to drive the economic growth, like roads, bridges, public libraries, and all of that, we said India needs digital infrastructure that's non-exclusive, non-rivalrous, which allows to create a whole new level of public and private innovation on top of that. And India did that with a series of building blocks, starting with the ID program, which led to the kind of numbers you're seeing on top. And because of that ID program, which basically everybody has, India went from 400 million adults not having any form of paperwork or ID to prove who they are, to get a bank account or a telecom connection, to directly leapfrogging to a state-of-the-art, digitally interoperable, verifiable ID on cloud, which could be used by any public and private operator. And that just happened so quickly that today in India, it is possible to open a bank account in 3 minutes, open a telecom connection in 3 minutes, because with this ID, I can give consent to any public-private bank or a operator and give my electronic KYC information and open a bank account pretty much very little time at the speed of light, at the speed of compute. So that's exactly where India has managed to put this way of thinking, infrastructure, not solutions, allowing public and private to harness that infrastructure, just like how a road as a public infrastructure is harnessed both by school buses and Ferraris, a public infrastructure that could be harnessed by both public, welfare-centric solution providers to private for-profit solution providers too. So that's exactly how India has been evolving. And we have seen the version 2, which is also a great story by itself. India was doing very little electronic payments in 2016, about less than 200 million transactions a month. Today, India does, thanks to some of these efforts, close to 12.5 billion transactions a month. I mean, we do more transactions per day in India with this API infrastructure called UPI than what MasterCard does the whole world. And we all on MasterCard. But UPI did that in 7 years. We went from zero on UPI to more than 12 billion transactions on UPI a month. And that's the kind of leaps India is making. And again, it's not a very AI-like solution, technology, but it's a way of thinking. It's a way of putting technology to action in a way that supports innovation and inclusion simultaneously. It gives agency to individuals, small businesses, big corporations, small corporations to sort of unlock volume and create this massive cost curve declines in accessing goods and services. Today, I think the cost of moving money from A to B is the cheapest in the world. That's what India India's public rails as digital infrastructure offer. And that unifies what is otherwise a very, very fragmented economic ecosystem that India had. Today, even a local auto rickshaw, a taxi driver, three-wheeler, or a tender coconut seller on the street who probably does not even have a roof during the summer, does collect electronic payments. This QR code will flash and you can make an electronic payment from your mobile phone. Because India seems to have a way to work on these very complex, nuanced details when it comes to financial, socio-economic inclusion, to do this, and that nuanced way has some story which I think is relevant for some of the complex problems we're dealing with, and that's where some of our efforts, which we call the version 3, with Beckett, taking the same thinking forward. India is building these building blocks, which are essentially open specifications, open source specifications, which anybody can use, and Beckett protocol is one such, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But it kind of takes that idea and imagines even for beyond banking, beyond financial inclusion, to areas like how do we solve for inclusion when it comes to access to markets, access to jobs, access to learning, access to healthcare, access to clean energy, access to sustainable goods and services. How do we solve for, but at population scale? The question that is always at the center of this argument is, can we do this at population scale and in good speed? And that's essentially where this form of thinking has gone in, and that's where DPI comes in. Quick summary of what I just said, because I know sometimes DPI is a little nuanced for people to get. Think of this just like a physical infrastructure created a whole lot of innovation. Think of DPI as digital public infrastructure that can create public and private innovation. But the infrastructure itself by itself offers no value, but it enables, it distributes that ability to solve for innovators on top, for solution builders on top, just like how we created. Now, when it comes to climate action, this is the twin problem that we are facing with. On one side, we have climate action which is complex and has to be done in a certain time. At the same time, there is this whole significant part of the world's population that is now coming to benefit from formalization of the economy, like India, in Brazil, most of Africa, the Southeast Asia, but also benefiting from this progress that comes through digitization and access to online economy. So this is the two things. So the question, I think one of the biggest problems the countries, especially the countries in global south, would have is, how do I still continue to grow? Because I am in that growth phase in my economy. How do I still continue to maintain, let's say, 7.5% growth? But this growth model would be very, very different from the growth model of the industrialized economies in the past. Because in that pursuit of industrialized economies, they ended up carbonizing. Now we know the reality of climate action. So now we have to find a way to grow at 7.5% without carbonizing, by decarbonizing. And that's an unprecedented question many of the growth economies have. So you have to solve for climate action, not at the cost of growth, but find a way to grow by decarbonizing. And that's a very complex question which leads to a whole lot of uncertainty. I don't think any of the prior playbooks are going to come into a useful sort of a way to address this question, and that's where we are. And in the middle of this, and then we are already seeing the whole technology third epoch of AI and all coming in. So that puts us in very, very interesting times as to how do we actually ask the question. And this is what you see. Climate action today, everybody, whether it's a country, company, organization, research organization, are making several bets. Because there's no one answer to this complex, convoluted, multi-dimensional problem. The challenge, however, is all of these bets are happening inside us. Of course, some of these bets, there could be a silver bullet, there could be somebody saying nuclear fusion is the answer for clean energy, don't bother solarizing your plants or your households. Somebody can say, no, I can just suck the carbon out of the air, sequester it from the air directly. All of them are silver bullets we are chasing. There are also policy and financial instruments that we are all chasing, but they're all happening inside. The question, again, bringing scale back into discussion is, can we do this collectively at scale at the level where the problem warrants a response? And that is a method problem. That is not an innovation problem. That is not a technology breakthrough problem. That's a way to come together to take collective action, and that is why we have to solve for the challenges that comes in applying any method. If anything has to be solved at exponential scale and exponential cost, at exponential scale and speed, there are a whole lot of other hidden costs that we tend to forget. Fine, EV charging is the way forward, EV vehicles are the way forward. So in India, we are barely getting started on EV adoption, and we have 40 or 60 plus EV charging operators already in play, all operating in silo. Everybody wants to solve the green transport e-mobility transition, but everybody is doing it as a lone hero in silo. We have more than 60 different EV charging companies, charging operator companies, and the average utilization of these EV chargers are less than 10%. But that's not an outcome that we want. Okay, and we face this problem. So there's a cost of discovery, there's a cost of transaction, there's a cost of trust, which happens at a population scale. These costs become significantly exponential. Now, I want to take this analogy of cell towers in telecom business. There was a time when India was going through this telecom sort of a growth when mobile phones were to be given, mobile connections were to be offered, and every mobile company were building their own boat in the form of a private exclusive cell tower distribution infrastructure. They said, oh, that's my mode, that's my strength. To a point when we suddenly realized that that's not sustainable, then everybody started sharing cell towers as a common shared infrastructure. And then we set to large access, reduction of cost of access, and we led to a significant amount of teledensity. So creating that shared infrastructure requires a new way of thinking, and that's where an open architecture that brings all of them together, open standards that brings all of them together to accelerate this action, not individual actions, but collectively accelerate exponential scale, whether it's solving for energy, movement of material, movement of water, conservation of water, all livelihoods cannot be many siloed efforts, even if they are simple bullet efforts, they need collective action, and that's where the model of internet has been working. Backend is solving for both the economic growth side of that collective effort. Backend by itself does not offer a solution. It is trying to tie all these efforts and create this internet-like transaction economy where all solutions flourish. It creates an open playground for the real heroes to emerge, whether it's on the economy side or the sustainable action side. And this is something we're doing. We're doing that in energy because energy is also, it looks like a ball of scrambled egg. It's as fragmented as this. Yeah, it's literally like this, and we have to unify all these efforts. Everybody is making several bets. How do we bring them all together, especially in India? And therefore, we are using backend as keep some of these parts. How do we shift this siloed approach to the left-hand side to a network collective scaling where the costs are shared, the risks are shared and distributed so that innovation can have a chance, growth and access can have a chance. And with this model, and probably in the interest of time, skip some of this, what we are creating what is called as a virtual energy network. Imagine an internet for energy. That's what India is trying to do to accelerate green, because energy ecosystem by itself is easily decentralized. From first mile energy generation to coal-fed plants to very, very hyper-local for last mile solar rooftop registries to idling batteries in a school bus, which is probably not available for the second function. The first function is to use it as a school bus, but the 400 kilowatt battery is lying idle for the rest of the day. Can I harness that? Even if it's a unit of one lying in remote corner, fragmented, isolated, can I bring that energy back and charge an EV car, which is lying, probably needs a green energy? How do we bring all this together? It's an effort India is getting started. Hopefully by next year, if there's an opportunity Joe gives, it doesn't look like I've taken too much time, but if there's an opportunity next year, we can certainly show some progress on this way of thinking. But India is building many such networks, and energy network is one such. And you'll see some demos in the afternoon, which shows how a network can be put up literally in 5 minutes as a programmable infrastructure. And you have an AI bot that will discover an EV charging infrastructure on that network, irrespective of who provides that EV charging infrastructure in the neighborhood. So this is essentially what I thought I can give you as a way of thinking, as a method that combines the best of technology transformations we are seeing and the climate problem, and see if we have a fighting chance to do this at scale.